Koyanamik. Civil Palma Kai Bigautiku take Inuit Kauyut, a child not to make up a Kaugati, Sirion not to see, Ubigusitunga. I'd like to acknowledge the previous panel that was up here before I start. They talked about very important issues that I often bring up and Inuit often bring up about mental health, suicide prevention, suicide, and all those social issues that Inuit face. It just goes to show how healing should be partly considered as capacity building. Healing should be partly considered as economic development, because when we heal as Inuit in our communities, we contribute more to the community and the global economy. The minister just reminded me too that there's usually very important fellow Inuit missing in these forums. That is our Chikaka fellow Inuit. They are often unable to come to these forums because of funding and because of their political reality. So I shouldn't forget our Chikaka fellow Inuit. We're almost at the end of this forum, I think. I think we've all listened, shared, and I'm sure we learned from each other today and this week. On Tuesday, I urge you to leave this forum with new partners to shift your views of the Arctic and move beyond the challenges of the changing Arctic to imminent opportunities. We must be bound by a foundation that ensures safer and sustainable Arctic in 2030 as we look towards a comprehensive Arctic policy, our economic endeavors, and a shared future. Like the previous panel reminded us, I must remind you that looking ahead can be challenging for many Inuit. It's very difficult. Okay. It's very difficult when your home is crowded, moldy, and inefficient. When you spend most of your money on heating and feeding your family. Often with store-bought food that is not as nutritious as our country food. From the land, the lakes, and the sea. When mental health issues in your communities is an epidemic, and your youth are committing suicide. Not to mention the school rates, the graduation rates. Taking all this into consideration is daunting. However, all of the elements of our reality has not discouraged Inuit. We continue to have optimism about our future, especially when we have forums such as this. And I hope this is not just talk. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege to be in our northernmost community of Canada, in Grise Fjord, the home of about 120 Inuit, as well as to Pond Inlet, which has about 1,600 Inuit. They welcomed Kupi Kleist, Eva Ariak, and myself as commissioners of the Greenland Canada Eegeesiak Commission. Beyond the beauty of the region were the incredible people who were exiled, forcibly located from northern Quebec to the far north to secure sovereignty for Canada. They spoke of terrible conditions, despair, and death. Then they spoke of their amazing relationship with Greenlandic Inuit and how they wanted the Greenlanders who had crossed from Qaanaaq to visit kin and hunt and to stay with them. They spoke of the spirit of their community in the face of all manner of challenges such as relocation, residential schools, starvation. They show that Inuit can overcome any hardship if we maintain kinship ties to our communities in Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chikaka. If we can achieve the same level of healthcare, education, opportunity afforded to other peoples in our countries. If we are able to live on, harvest our wildlife, and maintain our relationship to our land. If our knowledge system is valued and used alongside other knowledge systems for evidence-based decision-making. If we have the respect for and recognition of our cultural practices from national and the international community we live in. If we have our rights respected and recognized. And if we have, and if not if and when we have the free, prior, and informed consent over any action that impacts our lives, lands, and resources. Just to go back to the beginning where I talked about the capacity building, it was a little bit more adding to the daunting, I guess, when the shipping guy was up here, Mr. Mead, I think. And he talked about 200 plus more ships, I think he said, on top of what is happening now, that will increase. If he gets all the resources, if you get all the resources that you want, that's in addition to all the activity that's happening right now in our communities. Inuit have an established system of governance, and as I noted on Tuesday, we welcome partnerships and relationships that genuinely recognize our human rights, as affirmed in international instruments. The ICC recognizes the advances made by various Arctic states to recognize and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. And in particular, we welcome the Canadian government's recent announcement to adopt and implement the UN Declaration without qualification. In this context, we urge other Arctic Rim countries to actively commit to the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and to make an investment in the work of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples. Also, to actively commit to the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, Convention on Biodiversity, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Paris Agreement adopted under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the World Intellectual Property Organization and the Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore. And for those that have not done so, to consider ratification of the International Labour Organization Convention 169 on Indigenous people and tribal peoples. In addition, Indigenous peoples from all corners of the globe have called for substantial resources to collaborate with the UN and its agencies, funds, and programs to ensure their direct participation in achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We know that one sure way of empowering Inuit is to meaningfully implement the right to free, prior, and informed consent as affirmed in the UN Declaration. The Declaration and other international human rights instruments elaborate upon the need to ensure that Indigenous peoples have heard, discussed, and prioritized whether or not they will give or withhold their consent, and determine for themselves the nature of safe and sustainable use of their resources. Without the effective implementation of this important international standard, we will continue to see our issues rise to the highest reaches of our courts, as seen, for example, by the community of Clyde River, who is currently challenging the seismic testing because of the fears they have for its impacts on marine mammals surrounding their waters. I'm very proud to say that I'm part of that region and initiated some of that work. The simple message is, talk with us, not to us. Hear what we have in our minds and in our hearts. Learn what our concerns are, and include us in the decision-making at every level and at every stage. If such steps are taken in good faith, then we probably won't need to go to the courts to defend our rights. Inuit have a will for sustainable and equitable development. However, it has to be in accordance with our aims, our values, our ethics, and on the basis of fair conditions and real partnership. This is not a lot to ask for. After all, the Arctic is our homeland. We live here, and we intend to ensure that our future generations will live here as well. As the world looks northward for resources, shipping, fisheries, and tourism, Inuit must be heard. We must be part of any decision-making in and for our Nunat. I think you've heard this week, that we have a wealth of untapped knowledge. Tuesday, I opened the door to positive change, to productive and respectful partnerships, to working together for a sustainable and more secure Arctic. Today, I urge you to walk through it. Let's show the rest of the world progress by implementing international instruments, conventions, and agreements, by implementing national agreements and building capacity at the local level. Several have said that the activity is increasing and increasing due to climate change. Put another way, I hope activity is increasing because we are fostering relationships with Arctic peoples. By 2030, Mr. Mead said there will be $500 billion additional dollars or GDP or something to that effect, should the activity that they're expecting be there. How much of that will stay in the Arctic? As Monica lightly, very eloquently finished with her presentation earlier, Minister Okalik, Ataw silmik inu katigita lakayok ilagay ako malyaka Ataw silmik inu katigi simayuto kalugata inu katigita. I can't translate that. Thanks, Monica, and Kuyanami.